here on the Wilderness Battlefield in May of 1864, the American Civil War changed. This was the first clash between Lee and Grant. The stakes were incredibly high. Grant, the new commander-in-chief of the all Union armies, had decided to attach himself to the army here in Virginia, the Army of the Potomac. He knew that the fate of Lincoln's administration in the upcoming election depended on what happened here in the wilderness and in the campaign in the spring of 1864. Grant knew he had two challenges coming to Virginia. One was to defeat Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, which had been rarely beaten by Union armies here in the early years of the war. The second job he had, though, was to impart upon this army, the Army of the Potomac, a new attitude about fighting, one of aggression, one that would take the battle, to Lee himself. And the process of changing this war, of turning the Union Army from a rather passive instrument of Union policy into an aggressive pursuer of Union victory, began here on the morning of May 5th, 1864. Grant had hoped to get through this tangled area of woods known as the Wilderness, but more than getting through the Wilderness, he wanted to engage Robert E. Lee. And if the opportunity to engage Lee came first, he would take it, even if it meant fighting in this horrid, tangled landscape. And on the morning of May 5th, 1864, word came to Grant and to General George Meade, who commanded the army itself, that Lee was here, that his army was approaching from the west. And so Grant immediately ordered this army to attack. Now, the Army of the Potomac had not been known for its aggressive moves earlier in the war. It was not known for its offensive excellence in the war, but Grant insisted that Lee be brought to battle. And so, at midday on May 5th, 1864, the Union 5th Corps, commanded by a man named Gouverneur Warren, whose headquarters would eventually be here at Elwood, behind me, launched an attack at a place called Saunders Field. That attack came after the urging of Grant. Tens of thousands of men passed through this area on their way to battle. The headquarters of the army was here. Grant's headquarters were here. This area, which was wide open at the time, hardly a tree on the landscape as we looked off to the northeast. It's a landscape we eventually hope to restore here, to reclaim some of the views that were so important to Meade, so important to Grant, as they commanded this battle on May 5th and 6th, 1864. But the important story here, in addition to the personal human horror of the battle itself, is Grant. The imposition of his will on this army to turn it into a different sort of fighting machine than it had been before. And this would signal a major change in how this war was fought and how it was experienced. Before the Battle of the Wilderness, men in the course of a year might be under fire for 8 hours, 10 hours, all year long. Under Grant, as this army moved through the wilderness and on to Spotsylvania and on to Cold Harbor and Richmond and Petersburg, these same men would be under fire for 8 hours a day sometimes. It became this grinding human ordeal that would test the limits of everyone, but ultimately would succeed in diminishing the Confederacy, would succeed in bringing the war to a successful conclusion in 1865.